Well, good evening and welcome to the launch of our latest book from Wilberforce Publications, The Nation's Gospel, Volume 2. And I'm delighted to be joined tonight by Jeremy Thomas, the author of the book. Jeremy, there he is. Welcome, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm well, Tim. Thanks. Good to see you.
Great. Jeremy, congratulations on getting this book out. It's a fantastic piece of work, a culmination of a number of years of research and study. Very, very impressive. I'm looking forward to reading it in detail, carefully. Jeremy, just tell us a bit about your background and how did you get into writing amazing books like this?
Well, thanks, Tim. Yes, it's a slightly unusual background. My background is in law. I was a solicitor in the City of London for nearly 25 years. But for the last 10 years or so, since around 2010, I've been researching and writing this series of The Nation's Gospel. I suppose with all the hubris of a city lawyer, I thought I could polish off the work in a few years. But here we are a decade later, we're still going. I think what surprised me was the prolixity of theologians. They're far worse than my legal brethren. But anyway, we're getting close to the final straight, and with book 2 out, we'll be halfway there, and 3 and 4 are not far off. So I think that's a bit of a sort of a short story. Where have we got to?
Fantastic. And can you introduce for viewers who might not yet know the series, The Nation's Gospel? What's the aim of the series? What are you trying to achieve with that series?
Yeah. Well, look, the Nation's Gospel really looks at how Christianity has been spread in Britain over the 500 years from 1516 to 2016. And those 500 years have been chosen because it's a sort of the beginnings of Protestantism and Reformation. Erasmus's Greek-Latin New Testament came out in 1516, and that's the book that sort of gave Martin Luther all his ideas. But the particular series itself really tries to do 4 things over that 500 years. First of all, it tries to look at what is the gospel that the churches are proclaiming as the Christian message, because the message does change. And what I try and do is to look at how church attendances vary over that period, depending upon the message being proclaimed. The second thing that the books do is just look at how the message is being proclaimed. So are we looking at open air preaching? Are we looking at house visitation, tract distribution, Sunday schools, and more recently films, colporteurs? The list is legion. So I'm looking at how the message has been sort of broadcast into the nation. And the third factor the books try and look at is what's the impact upon the nation in terms of social organisation, looking at schools, hospitals, that type of thing, good works, and the impact on the nation's morality. And then finally, I look at what sort of tends to hold back the spread of the Christian message, really intellectual challenges, of which there have been a particular number in this book. And you often find that it's the intellectual challenges that can lead to, I suppose, tampering with the biblical message. And it's a message that also the spread of the gospel is, I think, far more significant than we think today. In the past, certainly in the Victorian period, they looked at Protestantism, and they thought it was the rise of Protestantism that explained the rise of Britain to be a world power. I mean, it had hitherto been a fairly obscure nation on the edge of northeastern Europe. But during the 19th century, it was lifted to this sort of world status, and you can find people like Lord Macaulay who would say, Protestant nations in the past had been sort of proverbial for barbarity and sterility, but under Protestantism, they had been turned into, with skill and industry, into gardens, and they produced heroes and statesmen and prophets and poets. So they saw it. This is what the nation, the source of its greatness.
Yeah, fantastic. So, and by the way, if you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook, do add your comments and questions. You've got any questions for Jeremy about this, we can put them to him. I see that Peter King on YouTube there has said he just put both your books, Jeremy, on his wish list, hoping for someone to buy them for Christmas. Very good. Yeah, hopefully some more people might do that as well. Jeremy, volume 2 then, which is the one we're talking about today, is called Revolution to Revival. And I think, if I'm right, is it 1791 to 1900? Tell us about what the highlights are of volume 2.
Volume 2 is the one that excites you if you want to see Christianity at its apogee, really. It kicks off with the French Revolution and the death of John Wesley. The French Revolution had been a sort of horror story for Christians in Britain. They saw the blood flowing in France, and they certainly didn't want it over here. So it really re-energized British Christianity, and in particular, you find the work of William Wilberforce. I mean, we obviously remember him today as a slave trader, but in many ways, his greatest contribution.
Abolishing the slave trade, I thought, Rob. But anyway.
Sorry, abolishing slavery. Sorry, completely slip of something. Anyway, abolishing slavery. But his book, Practical Christianity, was really aimed at converting the middle classes and the upper classes, and it did that very effectively. So you find the great Edmund Burke read it on his deathbed and is thankful. Arthur Young, who I came across in my student days as a A-level historian, he was the man at the Board of Agriculture and did great things there. He was another convert of Wilberforce's Practical Christianity. So we're looking at that epoch, and we're also looking at that's the sort of the conversions of the upper classes, as it were, middle classes, and then the book also looks at the great Christian works to try and reach the working classes. So you've got the Primitive Methodists, the Brethren, the Salvation Army, Church Army, and many individual evangelists, and we look at their work, and then how their work also influenced Christian morality and how education was spread to the working classes. So there's a lot there. And then, of course, you've got, at the same time as this great Christian revival in the 19th century, particularly around 1859, you've got sort of the opposite forces. So you've got Charles Darwin on the origin of species. You've got John Stuart Mill on liberty. It's 1858, John Ruskin, who'd been a great stalwart of Christian intellectualism and his books on art and architecture, he turns against Calvinism in 1858, and therefore he's going to be a bit of an antagonistic. He sort of knocks Protestantism severely from thereafter. And there are others. Karl Marx produced his contribution to political economy in 1859. There's a whole great plethora of literatures and philosophies attacking Christianity from around the mid years of the 19th century. We get into that quite extensively, and I think the whole spiritual battle is quite exciting.
Well, there's a lot going on there. I can tell a lot of content in this book. I think we've got Andrea Williams on the line there. Andrea, hi, nice to see you.
Good to see you tonight.
Andrea, you know Dick Lucas, who we're going to play a short video of now. Do you want to introduce him to us before we play this little video?
Yes, and before I do that, can I say, Peter King, just because you've been so cheeky, we will send to you those volumes. They're on your wish list, and the deal is that you have to read them. All right, so that's the deal.
They're very long.
And that's just because you were cheeky there, and because we really want people to read this book, we want people to these first two volumes, and we're looking forward to the rest of the volumes which will be published. Because what I want to say about this is I view this work as encyclopedic. And for those of us that are serious about our faith, serious about church history, serious about the Christian movement and its impact on culture across the centuries, then these are must-haves that must be there on our bookshelf, that we need to read and we need to understand. When we understand, when we take the time to read, then we will understand. As Jeremy has just alluded there, the spiritual battle was strong, massively interesting. Well, I'm sure that if we look at history in the way that Jeremy unpacks it for us, then we will understand the times today. Just as when we look at the Bible, we can understand where we're at. But I think to look at our own history and our own national history is very important. And let me commend you, Jeremy, and say that you spent 10 years or so writing these extraordinary volumes. Well done, because this will far outlive you and me.
That's what my wife tells me.
Wonderful. And this is the detailed, accurate, extraordinary labor of love to document the history of Christianity, in a sense, in our nation over the centuries. Such an important work. So thank you. I know that it has not been easy, and it's been a struggle, as you in many ways. Just the length of it, the sheer persistence, and therefore it is no wonder that Dick Lucas, I have to say, for myself, the greatest preacher of his generation. Well, so I know him, and I sat under his teaching, will continue to sit under his teaching, but sat under his teaching and preaching when I first graduated and came to London as a young barrister. And I had never had the Bible taught to me in such a way. I learned to love the Bible in a very new way, to read it in a new way, to study it in a new way. And I think it was under the ministry of Dick Lucas, it was that ministry that really transformed the whole way in which I handled scripture. But I remember as a young barrister, almost every week sitting in the front row, ready for the sermon that Dick Lucas would bring. And of course, when we think about him, just imagine this. He was born on the 10th of September in 1925, so almost a century ago. What a faithful man he has been. He's still alive today. He was converted to evangelical Christianity in 1941, and he then studied at Oxford and went on to serve in the Royal Navy during World War II. And after he had served in the Navy, he continued his undergraduate studies at Trinity College in Cambridge, and then he went to Ridley Hall, and he was ordained into the Church of England in 1951, and he became rector at St Helens in 1961. Now, just imagine this. I was not yet born when he became rector at St Helens, and there were just a few people there. By the time that I attended that church in 1987, it was already packed. And I'm just one person whose Christian life, whose Christian work has been transformed by the teaching and the preaching of this man. And as I know Jeremy's has too, we are very influenced by this man. And so it is a great honor for us to have this film tonight of Dick Lucas as he commends this book to you. But I think it's an honor for us to have him here with us tonight in this way. But let me say, Jeremy, to you, that it's a great honor and mark of the importance of your work. That I believe one of the great historical figures of the 20th century in Protestant Christianity in this country is commending your book in this way. So it's a serious book, and
Andrea,
so
I agree. I feel like Barlam, I can die the death of the righteous now.
So with no further ado, let's listen to this wonderful and great man who commends this wonderful and great work.
My name is Dick Lucas. I was ordained into the ministry of the Church of England in 1951, and I retired in 1998. I've spent a very happy 20 years retired. I have a wonderful successor, and I do a lot of my work is recording scriptural material for young preachers today. But I need to know more about the 19th century, so this is my best present so far. The question is, who is the book for? That's a very good question. Well, I would hope that all intelligent Christians will read it. It is quite a big book, isn't it? And we're not very good at big books these days, but it's very readable, and it's all cut up very nicely, which I think is very useful. It's got very good indices, or whatever they're called. And I would hope that at Christmas you would give this to your nephew, But I much more give it to my local assistant curate. People say they haven't time to read, but they'll soon find time to read this. And honestly, it's new ground, a lot of it. We don't even know our own 20th century history as we ought. We certainly don't know the 19th. I think the word Victorians covers so much, don't you, that is mythical. And here we do get down to some facts, which is very, very healthy for us. I rejoiced at that. Well, I was astonished. I mean, they were far more energetic than we are. They put us to shame. I mean, we've hardly begun. They start something almost every year. They start a new society almost every other year. I mean, it wasn't petering out after the great revival, was it? It was going strong in the 60s, the 70s. It's not until you get to 80 that they begin to slip. The antagonism is enormous from the scientists, or so-called scientists, of course, and from these novelists, many other ways. And yet these Christians were tremendously energetic in every kind of way, not just in preaching, in social activity and the like. So what puzzles me is how this secularism and this enthusiastic evangelicalism went on together for so long until suddenly, in the last 10, 20 years of the Victorian era, it becomes respectable to be not a Christian. You still go to church, of course, but actually you don't believe very much. You've been undercut. The foundations have gone. But it's been very cleverly done. Actually, I go back in the first half of the 19th century. Where did it start? I mean, we've all been taught about Darwin, fed up with it. But long before Darwin, the enemy had laid his gunpowder to blow the whole thing up. They were so energetic, they did everything, didn't they? They had societies for everything. The tract giving, I had a great Aunt Libba who used to stand at Victoria Station, apparently, in the late Victorian era, giving out tracts. I don't know, we tend to underestimate that today and feel rather embarrassed about it. Partly that we're too cowardly to do it, I think. And we don't know how to write perhaps the tracts that they did. I mean, a Ryle tract wasn't just a little floppy piece of paper. It was 13, 14 pages of explanation, which suggests that they were educated people who could read things like that in their cottages. Extraordinary, really, that they could tackle stuff like that. But they went everywhere, from the poorest cottage to the palace. People read Ryle. He's a great figure, there's no doubt about that. I was delighted to find the length that Jeremy goes to pointing out these writers. I think I had no idea how influential these people were. My dear old mother was a great reader of novels. You know, she read all the Trollope and all that sort of thing. I don't know if I'm allowed to make a quotation. I did know something about that because I'd been at Oxford and read essays to C.S. Lewis. Can you believe it? The Navy sent cadets to Oxford for 6 months. For some reason, I had to read essays. This makes me tremble to think of the great C.S. Lewis listening to my essays. I don't know why he didn't have a heart attack. But so I knew this. Let me quote just one thing. If we judge the 19th century from the books it wrote, the outlook of our grandfathers, by which he means for us, of course, our great-grandfathers and so on, was quite as secular as our own. The novels of Meredith, Trollope, and Thackeray were not written either by or for men who see this world as the vestibule for eternity, who regard pride as the greatest of sins, who desire to be poor in spirit or look for the supernatural salvation. Even more significant is the absence of Dickens' Christmas Carol. There's no interest in the incarnation. Mary, the Magi, the angels are replaced by spirits of his own invention, and the animals present are not the ox and ass in the stable, but the goose and turkey in the poulterer's shop. I think that's delightful. Well, now, you know, most people reading Dickens and enjoy him don't realize that their values are entirely secular. And we think of Victorians as crushed by religion, even if they went Christians, but not a bit of it. These people were actually protesting against what they'd been brought up to. We were never told this, but it would have thrown a flood of light, wouldn't it, on our grandfathers? Why did they leave? Why did they become a secular? Why were they just churchmen and nothing else? You wouldn't have any Orthodox Christianity if you didn't remember the past, because every time we go to church on Sunday, we're looking back to the apostles and prophets. That's the past for sure. And we're looking back to our Lord, and that's his birth, death, resurrection, and ascension. So that's all history. And once you lose that anchor, and the church no longer looks back, and this happens a great deal, of course. You look to experience in the present, you look to the authority of the church, whatever that may be in the present. You lose your history, you lose your faith. I can't remember that we ever did anything like this. I think my debt to Jeremy is that he's filled me in with the rest of the 19th century. Probably most of us came to college, theological college, without a great deal of history. So what did they do? Well, they'll start with the early church, Reformation, Tractarian movement. That'll fill up enough for the term, and that's all there'll be in the examination. But that's quite fascinating. Tells us so many things going on in the 19th century that had a tremendous effect on evangelicalism, which I never really... Well, I knew some of them, but I didn't know most of them. Well, it's Isaiah all over again, isn't it? What did Isaiah say? Light is seen as darkness, darkness is seen as light. That's us today. In an incredibly short period. I've been retired for 20 years. I could not have said in the pulpit 20 years ago, darkness is light. I could not have said light is darkness without people realizing I was fooling them. But now you can say homosexuality is light. Light, the things we stand for, are darkness. It's an astonishing change. But that goes back to the 19th century. You can't explain it in terms of two world wars, as people try to do, although that, of course, upset everything. Upset so much social equilibrium, took so many generations of good away. No, it goes back to the 19th century, which is why I'm going to spend the fortnight reading this book all over again, to find out how the enemy got underneath to the roots and destroyed them. You've got to remember that there's always a time lag. I think this book points that out. The collapse comes, and everybody thinks it's due to something that's happened quite recently, but actually the rot has started a long way back. The other thing is you need to know, if you need know your Bible a little bit better, perhaps we don't know our Old Testament well enough, but the one thing I absorbed from the Old Testament was that Israel was never defeated when it was right with God. However strong its army was, it was easily defeated when it wasn't right with God. And so one of the things we've got to hammer home from this book is that the church was not, and is not being defeated because secularism is strong. One of the things that comes out of this book is how strong secularism is, and also how mad it is. No wonder the kids are getting mental disturbances. But this will never defeat the church if the church is right with God. And I think that's enormously encouraging. If we get our house in order, and I thank God for all the church planting, don't let's underestimate this church planting. It may look very small. I think I look to many of the black churches in the future. I think they're going to be immensely important, aren't they? We shouldn't underestimate what is happening. If the church gets right with its Lord, the enemy can't defeat it. That's the message of the Old Testament. At the moment, it looks as though secularism is undefeatable, doesn't it? It looks as though it's going to rain. It looks as though all standards are gone, doesn't it? But what you get at the end of the Gospels, isn't it, is this wonderful balance. You get the cross in all the four Gospels to tell you that the message of Christ will lead to Calvary. But then that's always followed by the resurrection. And I think that we must teach the young ministers that they will have to take up their cross, and that's going to be very hard. Many of them will lose their jobs. They won't be able to be chaplains at school. In all sorts of ways, they will be pushed out of the center, no longer respected. But the resurrection always follows. But you won't get the resurrection without the cross. And this is the thing that so many Christian movements have tried to do in recent years. You can't do that. You can't shortcut it. Frankly, I think the next 20 years are very frightening for the Christian witness. But if we're right with God, we've nothing to fear, though we may suffer. Once hell is gone, of course, and it's gone really in the Church of England, hasn't it, by and large? And the reasons for it. Let's get back. It's not just we want tub thumpers telling everybody to go to hell without reason. We have to start with the sense of sin, don't we? If you really go back to many of these men who left the gospel, it's because they never taught a doctrine of sin, which presumably meant they had never really been convicted of sin themselves. Once that brick is gone, the foundation is going to be in trouble, isn't it? I think Murray Watts makes the point that probably is the most fundamental reason why we're in the state we are today. Nowadays, if you talk about hell, probably just think you're being quaint. But why I love this book is because here is a man who's taken the trouble to do so much research. History books tend inevitably to be broad-brushed, don't they? I mean, I love being introduced to so many characters, you know, like Haslam and Geraldine Hooper. I mean, I don't know how you discovered her. I mean, she was a very great evangelist and speaker, and this is all done by going to one of these libraries. We're very blessed, of course, with these libraries, where if you ask, they will go down to their dungeons and their 7 miles of shelves, and they'll find things that people haven't been looking at for 10, 50 years. So I rejoice in a book that has done the research for me. I feel rather lazy. I'm the beneficiary, but I'm very grateful to Jeremy for that. But if you put all this together, that's what we've got to do as we read it. Where were the roots of secularism before the Great Revival in 1859? What an extraordinary thing that in 1859, The Origin of the Species is published at the same time as the Great Revival. Now, you see, young pastors, young preachers need to know that when something great is happening and we read Murray on the revival, which is a wonderful story, you also need to read the other side of the coin, don't you? That at the same time, the devil is producing his massive books to counterattack. I think we need the research to discover that. I was amazed that the way the enemy manages to produce his counterattack.
Wow, fantastic endorsement there, wasn't that, from Dick Lucas? And if he's endorsing it so much, wow, everyone should get a hold of a copy and read it. Jeremy, I've got a question for you here from YouTube, and if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook Live, do put your comments and questions in. Richard E on YouTube says, I enjoyed Volume 1 very much and looking forward to Volume 2. What are some of the key lessons Volume 2 might impress on Bible churches in England today? Okay,
that's a great question. I've just focused on one thing, which I've sort of been involved in myself, which changed my life, or at least my outlook on Christianity. Historically, I've always hated street evangelism, anything like that, avoided it like the plague. But one of the things that really strikes me is, and this isn't just over in Volume 2, you see in Volume 1, that Christianity doesn't really grow unless there are people going into the marketplace to explain it, to talk to people about their souls, to preach, to invite people to church. And you see that, I'll just give an example in the 19th century. Everybody thinks the 19th century was the great epoch of Christianity. Yeah, nobody wanted to go to church in the 19th century, in the working classes. They said, why? Why don't I go to church? So the Church of England built lots of churches. Nobody wanted to go. So what did they do? They had to go out in the streets to bring them in. And that is actually quite biblical, because if you look at there are 2 gospel parables. One is the parable of the great banquet, which is Luke 14, verses 15 to 24. And the master sends the folk out to bring them in to the great banquet. And the same with the marriage ban in Matthew 22. So there's a biblical authority for sending people out to bring them in. But they actually did that in the 19th century because they saw that people didn't want to come to church. That was the way they reached them out. So what I've started to do, and there's a group of us, we go down to Oxford Circus, and we've just been at on Saturday. We went down and we hand out these natty little Gideon New Testaments to folk there. And in fact, there are 15 of us there on Saturday, and 3 people praying for us. And in over an hour, we handed out 300. We ran out, actually.
Wow.
And in better times, we'd had a church flyer in. But of course, churches can't really deal at the moment with people in large numbers. And people do come in. I mean, just an aside, the church I go to is All Souls Langham Place. In other Christmases, the Muslims will be out handing out Prince Muhammad's birthday is also just before Christmas, and they'll hand out roses. And we've been down there handing out New Testaments, and people will come into church in the one hand with the New Testament, and the other hand Prince Muhammad's rose. It's like the day of Ahab. And Elijah. Which God are you going to follow? So anyway, street evangelism and its importance is one of the big things that has come out for me. Another one is sort of family religion. I don't think we do that very well. But anyway, I hope that's enough perhaps on.
Let me just say that just as an aside, I'm filming here from Bristol, where we have been in court all day with 4 street preachers who were taken off the streets for preaching. We've got a full body camera evidence was there, and you can see the crowd responding to the street preachers. And I think, Jeremy, a little bit like you said before reading all of this, that you could that you may have thought, oh no, I'm not sure about that, but you couldn't. And I think sometimes when you look from the outside in, for sure, these street preachers have a real sense of their own sin and the need for the urgency of the hour and the need for people to be rescued, and a real sense of heaven and hell and wanting to see people saved. You get it when you actually work with street preachers over a number of years, as we have done at the Christian Legal Centre. You can see it for real, but also the difference that they make in just keeping the streets open for the gospel and their courage. So, well done on handing out all those Bibles the other day. For sure.
Well, thank you. I can't resist, if I may, just adding an addendum, because I do think and the things that you're facing, Andrea, we think again that problems over street preaching and law is a modern thing. No, it's not. It was very much a Victorian period, because when the Salvation Army marched, there's something called the Skeleton Army that was created to destroy them and to stop it. And the Salvationists were normally got on the wrong side of the law.
Yes.
And the last person who went to jail, and I think he had hard labour, was as late as 1912 from the Salvation Army. And there's a whole list of them. And I once came across, I can't resist this as a lawyer. Any lawyers out there will find this fun. Bramwell Booth, who was the second general of the army, the General Booth's son, he had to deal with the lawyers when they were trying to get the Salvationists out of jail. And he did this not only in Britain, but he did it in the US, Germany, wherever. And he would always say the British lawyers were very good, but they were very expensive. The Americans always seemed to rack up a lot of hours, but the Germans, they were efficient. Anyway, so people like you, Andrea, have always had to engage with lawyers, and I'm sure sooner or later you might get an international understanding of their quality.
Wow. Yeah, there's obviously a lot of anecdotes you can inform us on, Jeremy.
Well, that's amazing. Just there, what we've just experienced. I'm here today working with the street preachers and I'm working for justice so that street preaching can continue in the streets of the United Kingdom today, right at this moment. We go back into court tomorrow morning. But just because I speak that, Jeremy immediately can go back. And if we understood this, we don't think of the Salvation Army suffering in that way, particularly, do we?
No.
The freedom of speech, I think, on the public square, it goes back hugely to the Salvation Army. It's one of those things I could do at some point, do more research, but it's broadening the whole thing out. There's a book there to be written. But it was clearly key in the past. And Yeah, there was a Lord Chief Justice Coleridge, I think, was the one who was the Lord Chief Justice who finally decided they were going to be allowed to march. But it was a huge battle over perhaps 30 years.
Wow. So, Jeremy, I've got an interesting question here from Sunil Raheja, is it? I hope, from YouTube. He says, Jeremy, can you comment on the disproportionate impact individuals have had on the spread of the gospel under the sovereignty of God? What's your view on that question?
Oh, yeah, I think that's key. Individuals always change things. I think that's undoubtedly true. And hello, Sunil. I knew you'd ask a nasty question, but anyway, it's lovely to see you. Yeah, I mean, let me give just a few obvious ones. Towards the end of the 19th century, most of the denominations are having problems the last decade or so. But the Baptists are still growing. And why are they still growing? Well, Spurgeon is now dead, but the people he'd converted, the energy he'd delivered to them, the organizations he'd established were still in motion. So the Baptists are still driving forward, whereas the Congregationalists, who had been a great denomination, a lot of wealthy people in there, they're getting rather fat, flabby and respectable. So, and again, with Methodism, there are some northern Methodist preachers. Thomas Langton is one. Chadwick's another one. Langton is the one I love. He just he's a sort of not a well-known evangelist today, but he just walked the wolds, the vales of Yorkshire, knocked on people's doors. People were converting in their thousands. The chapel sprouted up. All the chapels we're probably closing down now, but for 150 years or so. So individuals have always been key, and there are some who are great men on their own, and others who build organizations. So I'll give a female one. There's a lady called Ellen Ranyard who set up a sort of organization. It's I can't remember, the women's something Bible and domestic whatever, but it was a very efficient house visiting organization for about 100 years. And William Wilberforce always used to say that Ellen Ranyard's got greater skills than any politician and statesman that I know. Because she'd created this thing from nothing. Large organizations run by women weren't particularly, I suspect, encouraged at the time, but she did it. And a lot of house visiting organizations, I'd have said, emulated her work. So yes, and in one sense, I think one of the paucity of our particular age is we've got very few great men, sadly. Whether you look at the political side of things, or the church side of things, or finance. I mean, again, if you go to the 19th century, particularly the strange enough, the non-conformity, the Peafreens, the Biscuit people, the Cadburys, the Barclays, they were all big, important Christian families who funded vast quantities of things.
Amazing.
So individuals are key, and the ability to.
So perhaps a follow-on, Jeremy, then, is who are your favourite characters from the period?
Who are my favourite? Well, I do think Wilberforce is a great man, because when he wrote his Practical Christianity, he was pretty much, Christianity was not popular. It was despised, just as it was today. And the fact that he came out with Practical Christianity, I mean, the sort of one of his contemporaries writes, he was like a thunderbolt. It created electricity because the political establishment were astonished that Wilberforce should tarnish his name with, demeaning Christianity. So Wilberforce, I think, is clearly one. On the female side, there's a lady called Geraldine Hooper, who Dick mentions, who is a descendant of the Bishop of Gloucester, who was the martyr. And she worked with Haslam, again, Dick mentioned. And Haslam was a great preacher, did a lot of street preaching. And Haslam, one day, he's doing something in Bath, and he can't make it or something. And Geraldine Hooper has to preach. She preaches, and she's very good. And people converted. And I have to say, I'm a male headship man, so you have to see this in its context. But anyway, she then, and then there's another occasion when he's gone out preaching, and this is the lovely, it's in Norfolk, and he's returning home on a snowy day, snowy night, and he sees in the distance the lights of his house. And when he arrives there are thousands of people around his house. His wife and Geraldine Hooper are preaching because he's not there. And literally thousands of people are converted. Anyway, she then, I think they build a church for her, frankly. And at one point she stands in for Booth when he's not well and his wife. But sadly, she doesn't have a long ministry, so she's forgotten about now. But she was clearly a remarkable woman. So I think, Ellen Ranyard, Geraldine Hooper, Wilberforce. I mean, you've got to put Spurgeon and people like Thomas Langton. But there are lots. There are so many. In that 19th century, it was a unique movement of God in many ways. Amazing.
And can you tell us, Jeremy, because I think that Dick mentioned the Great Revival in 1859, and I'm not sure that many people are as familiar with that as they perhaps ought to be. What happened? Tell us what is the substance of the 1859 revival?
Well, it was undoubtedly the 1850s were a high point of Christianity. There's no doubt about that. You can find people saying, you can walk to church. You may be sneered at, but people do walk the streets carrying a Bible to church quite happily. But 1859 is when there's a real spiritual takeoff, and it really starts in Northern Ireland. There's a lady whose name evades me at the moment, but she's preaching to the dying, and a chap called James McKilkin, I think it is. I may not pronounce that properly. Others will probably correct me on that. But anyway, he hears her. And he's converted. He starts praying, and 2 or 3 friends are converted. And then they reach a stage where they can go into this little hut and they pray for people, and they're struck down almost spiritually dead and become Christians. Anyway, this business gets picked up by the press, and it starts to get amplified. And so you then get huge numbers of conversions and prayer gatherings being set up, particularly in Wales and Scotland. So there's a lovely image that's in the book. There's called the Laird of Andilly. He's a sort of local nobleman, as it were, and he starts preaching. So at Thursday, you find about 5,000 people come to listen to him. Anyway, this thing spreads. It does reach London. So the great Spurgeon, I think, baptizes 1,000 people in 1859 or 1860 or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
It's just a great, a classic. I think one church may have picked up. Aberdare Congregationalists picked up 1,200 people to their church roll in 1859. Wow. It's just remarkable spiritual growth, and it does run on for a few years. Denominations that have been going downwards start to increase their roll, and those denominations that have been were on the rise just rocket in church numbers.
Wow. So, and what would you put that down to? Is it the preaching? What would you put it down to?
Well, the classic view is prayer seems to have taken over. You can find there are various journals you can look at. London has got sort of, I think about 20. There were 20 prayer meetings for revival being advertised each week in London, and 93 in the nation, or something. That's there was definitely the nation was. The schools were rolling Christian theology into their children. There's the ragged schools as well, the Sunday schools. Wilberforce, it's got respectable through Wilberforce. The upper classes were taking people to church. If you had servants, you can find articles that say, look. You've got to get your servants to church. And if your children are ill, you, the mother, stay at home, and you send the servants to church, because this is far more important, and you do the work.
Well, I just long to recapture this. I mean, that surely, in terms of wouldn't it be amazing to see revival meetings, prayer revival meetings advertised across 90 locations in London, let's say, and way beyond. And also just there, the point that you made on the importance of the schools. Although we may have church schools in this country, they're delivering a secular curriculum. And the importance of just instilling true Christianity into our children, and the fact that we have vacated that space is heartbreaking. And as you say, at this time when revival was in the air, undergirded by prayer, we wouldn't have dreamed of leaving our children in the kind of situation that they currently are. I don't assume that's not what happened, because Christianity was the vibrant lifeblood of the schools, of the education system.
Yeah.
Jeremy, do you think we can recapture that? I mean, do you think that? What do you think we can do in our current situation? What can we learn? Given it looks, as Dick Lucas said, literally darkness is called light, and light is called darkness. I mean, it is the Romans exchange. The Romans want exchange of exchanging truth for a lie, and calling it good. I mean, what do you say to us? What do you say to us all that are listening to you this evening in terms of what you've learnt on that long labour of yours?
Well, I think if I was going back, I would go back to Wilberforce's Practical Christianity. And within a couple of pages of it, he kicks off with, I think it's Romans 14:10, that we're all going to stand before the judgment seat of God. And, you're going to give an account. You may not like it, you may not believe it, but you are. And he then sets out the next 300 pages what real Christianity looks like, and it's a bit of a thunderbolt to the rest of society. And he says, if you don't obey, you're going to end up into Romans 1:20 territory. That's where you end up. If you avoid the peculiar doctrines of Christianity, of heaven and hell, and of salvation through the death of the Lord Jesus Christ, and of the authority of the Scriptures, you will end up in Romans 1:20 territory. Now, he doesn't spell out that men will sleep with men and all that sort of stuff, but that's what he quotes the verse. That's where he puts it. And of course, they hadn't gone as far as we have. You see, we've gone far further in the church, for instance. We're even debating it as being possible. But that's where. So I think, and if you were to say where, in the church terms, where it's all gone wrong, it is the abandonment of heaven and hell. Because once you lose that, nothing else really much matters. Is a debating point. Do I believe that that's right or this is right? Okay, it's for you. That's fine. Not for me. If you don't agree with me, that's not very loving. But it is against that somber fact of judgment. That's the.
Don't often hear preaching about hell these days, do we? In the church in Britain, broadly speaking.
Yeah. So that would be my take.
And that is a feature of revivals generally, isn't it? That there's preaching about hell.
Well, you've got to accept it. Why convert if there is no hell? The very fact that God loves me, I can understand that. I'm rather lovable, I think. She's rather lovable. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Yes.
And I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure Tim finds himself very lovable.
I'm going to say my wife is lovable. I don't know about me, but there we are.
Oh, she is. She's the best.
Listen, Jeremy, I think we're running out of time, but listen, that's been a great conversation. And I think we can evidently see the wisdom and amazing anecdotes and stories that you've learned from all your research, and that you've documented in these books, and particularly in the one, Volume 2, that we've been talking about today. And it's definitely going to be an incredibly valuable resource, probably for generations to come, but certainly for people today. So if you haven't yet bought it or put it in a wish list, do that. It's available on Amazon today. There will be hardback copies coming, hopefully in time for Christmas very soon next week, and we'll make you aware of that and how you can obtain those as well. But on Amazon today, and a great Christmas present for your pastor and other people who who are interested and will be keen to learn these kind of lessons. Andrea.
Yeah, I was just going to say that for those of you that have tuned in to this virtual launch, I think that video of Dick Lucas was very precious in terms of really setting out why we should read this book. And we can make, that is available, of course, we will make it available, but why not think about sharing that in your Bible study group? Why not think of giving that to your pastor? Because it really makes you want to go and read this book and understand history and how it then relates to today. So I think that that's a really useful resource. I have to say, Jeremy, I've loved speaking with you in this launch, because as I said, here I am in Bristol, but you really bring to the anecdotes there, rooted in history, make it real and vibrant, and that's all there to be found in the book. So, and we can see that we could have almost gone down any track, and you'd have had something to say. You know,
I've been lucky today.
Wonderful, wonderful, really wonderful.
No, the one big thing is nothing changes.
Yeah.
In church history. There are cycles and rhythms. There's sometimes Christianity is up, sometimes it's down, but there is a pattern to it. It's a spiritual battle. And
we might feel like we're in a spiritual battle now, but it's always been a spiritual battle, and some of the battles are the same as well. And so we can learn from how they won the battles in the past, so we can win them again today. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Congratulations. Great. If you're watching today, do get hold of the book, recommend it, buy it for Christmas presents, and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and connect with our emails so you can hear all about our work, and we will put out that video of Dick Lucas as well as separately. Great to see you. Connect again. We're live on again on Friday lunchtime, and see you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.